Alara stood on her porch, watching the sunset splash the sky with soft pink and orange. Her brown curls moved in the breeze and she held her sketchpad close. For Alara, art was more than a hobby, it was a part of her. She loved creating songs, whether painting landscapes or designing wedding details. Now she was focused on the biggest moment of her life, her wedding to Kaylin. Everyone admired them as a couple. They seemed perfect together, always smiling and finishing each other's sentences. Alara was known for her kindness, always making handmade gifts or offering a kind word. Kaylin was ambitious and full of energy, quickly rising in the business world. They met 3 years ago at an art auction. Alara was nervously adjusting her glasses at her booth when Kaylin, confident in a sharp suit, bought one of her paintings. "You're talented," he'd said with a grin, "but I'm more impressed by how shy you are." Now, weeks from their wedding, Alara's small house buzzed with preparations. Invitations were sent, flowers ordered, and her mom's dining table was covered in fabric swatches and color samples. "Alara, did you check the tablecloth samples?" her mom called. "Coming, Mom," Alara replied, putting her sketchpad down. Her mom handed her fabrics with a smile. "This will be the most beautiful wedding anyone's seen," her mom said. Later, Kaylin came home. His car pulling into the driveway made Alara's heart skip, just like the first time they met. He stepped inside, his presence filling the room. "Where's my bride-to-be?" he called. "In here?" Alara said, peeking from the dining room. Kaylin hugged her and asked, "How's my favorite artist?" "Busy keeping our wedding plans on track," she teased, showing him fabric swatches. "Ivory or cream?" "Whichever makes you happy," he said with a wink. They spent the evening planning. Guest lists, music, decorations. Kaylin suggested adding a live band. "That'll get everyone dancing," he said. "You always bring excitement," Alara replied, smiling. As the days went on, Alara felt lucky. She had Kaylin, who supported her dreams, a community that cared, and a future that felt bright. People in the neighborhood admired them. Mrs. Howell next door often said, "You two are meant for each other." The wedding was set to happen in a beautiful garden at a historic mansion. Neighbors were even helping out, lending decorations and an antique car for Alara's arrival. One evening, after a long day of planning, Alara sat by the window, sketching the venue with fairy lights and flowers. Kaylin brought her tea and sat beside her. "You're amazing," he said, wrapping an arm around her. Alara leaned against him. "I want everything to be perfect." "It will be," he said. "We've got this together." But as Alara smiled that night, she couldn't shake the strange feeling creeping in. In the days leading up to the wedding, her excitement mixed with unease. She watched Kaylin rush out for work more often, leaving her with a heavy feeling she couldn't explain. Something was off, and soon she would find out why. They were deep in conversation, their heads tilted slightly toward each other. Lyra laughed at something Kaylin said, her voice carrying across the warm evening air like a melody. Alara froze mid-step, the letters clutched tightly in her hand. For a moment, she considered walking over, interrupting whatever was happening, but the weight in her chest held her back. Instead, she turned and headed inside, the door closing with a soft thud behind her. That night, as they lay in bed, Alara found herself staring at Kaylin's sleeping form. His features were serene, untouched by the unease that now constantly churned within her. She wanted to trust him, to dismiss the growing doubts as mere figments of her imagination, but the image of him and Lyric together lingered in her mind. The following week, Alara decided to confront her feelings in her own way. She began sketching again, but this time her art took a darker turn. Her once bright landscapes and cheerful designs were replaced by abstract pieces filled with tangled lines and stormy hues. Her mother noticed the shift during a visit and frowned. "Are you feeling all right, sweetheart?" she asked, gently touching Alara's hand. "I'm fine," Alara replied quickly, forcing a smile, "just experimenting with something new." But the truth was far from it. Every brushstroke felt like an attempt to untangle the confusion in her heart. She wanted to believe Kaylin loved her as much as he always had, yet the distance between them grew more palpable with each passing day. One evening, as Alara sat on the couch, Flipping through old photo albums, she heard Kaelin's phone buzz on the coffee table. He was in the shower, and without thinking, she glanced at the screen. A message flashed across the display. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing." Alara's stomach dropped. Her hands trembled as she stared at the words, the sender's name listed as L. A cold wave of realization washed over her, and she struggled to catch her breath. The pieces she had been trying to ignore finally clicked together. The late-night calls, the sudden work meetings, Lyric's constant presence, it all made a twisted kind of sense now. When Kaelin returned from the shower, Alara was still sitting on the couch, the phone now dark in her lap. He looked at her, his usual confident smile faltering when he noticed her expression. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern lacing his voice. Alara lifted her gaze to meet his, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who is L?" Kaelin froze, the color draining from his face. His hesitation was answer enough. I can explain," he stammered, running a hand through his damp hair. Alara stood, her heart pounding, as anger and hurt surged through her. "Then explain, Kaelin, because right now it feels like everything we've built together is a lie." He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. For the first time in their relationship, Kaelin looked powerless, and it terrified her. The silence stretched between them like an unbridgeable chasm. Finally, Alara turned and walked out of the room, her chest heaving with the weight of betrayal. As she sat alone in her studio later that night, surrounded by her unfinished paintings and shattered dreams, she realized one thing. The life she thought she knew was unraveling, and there was no going back. That night, as Alara lay in bed staring at the ceiling, sleep refused to come. Her thoughts were relentless, cycling through every interaction, every suspicious glance, every late-night excuse Kaelin had offered. Doubt clawed at her heart, but so did guilt. Was she reading too much into this? Was it all in her head? But the nagging unease wouldn't leave. When morning came, Alara rose with a heavy determination. She needed answers, concrete, undeniable proof of what her heart already suspected. She started with his phone. Kaelin had left it charging on the kitchen counter before heading out to a quick meeting. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, her stomach twisting at the thought of invading his privacy, but her need to know outweighed her hesitation. The screen lit up as she picked it up, and a notification caught her eye. It was a message from Lyric. Last night was worth the risk. Alara's breath hitched. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the phone. For a moment she stood there frozen, her mind racing. What exactly had been worth the risk? She didn't need to guess. The pit in her stomach told her everything. Still, she pressed on. She made her way to Kaelin's office, where he kept receipts and notes. Her heart pounded as she sifted through the papers, feeling like a trespasser in her own home. Finally she found it, a crumpled receipt from a cafe, dated just 2 days ago, the same cafe where she'd once seen him, but this time the timing made it undeniable. She sank into his desk chair, the paper limp in her hand. Everything she had tried to dismiss, every whisper of doubt, solidified into a devastating truth. The man she had loved, the man she had planned to marry, had betrayed her, and Lyric, her friendly, smiling neighbor, had been part of it all along. When Kaelin returned home that evening, Alara was waiting in the living room. She had spent the hours leading up to his arrival battling waves of grief and anger. But now, as she stood there with the receipt in one hand and her arms crossed, her emotions crystallized into one: resolve. Kaelin stepped inside, his usual easy smile faltering when he saw her. "Alara? What's wrong?" She met his gaze, her voice trembling but steady. "I know, Kaelin." His brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" She held up the receipt, her hand shaking slightly. "About Lyric, about the lies, about last night." His face paled. For the first time he was at a loss for words. The silence between them stretched, heavy and suffocating. Tears welled in Alara's eyes, but she didn't blink them away. "You looked me in the eye and promised me forever," she said, her voice breaking. "But the whole time, you were building a future with her." Kaelin opened his mouth, perhaps to deny it, but no words came. He stood there, guilty and exposed, his charm useless against the truth she had unearthed. Alara felt the tears stream down her face, but they didn't dull her resolve. Her dreams, her plans, her love, they had all been shattered. In that moment, she realized the future she had envisioned with Kalen was gone. She didn't say another word. Instead, she turned and walked upstairs, leaving him alone in the living room. She closed the bedroom door behind her and leaned against it, her body racked with silent sobs. But as the night wore on, something shifted inside her. The weight of betrayal began to give way to something else, something fiercer. She wasn't going to let this break her. Kalen's lies might have stolen her dreams, but they wouldn't steal her strength. As the first rays of dawn crept through the window, Alara rose, ready to face the new day, not as the woman who had been broken, but as the woman who would rebuild. It wasn't her fault. Alara knew that now. No amount of effort, love, or forgiveness could have fixed what had already been broken. But what she could do was walk away. Her trust might have been shattered, her heart left in pieces, but her strength, new unyielding, was just beginning to take shape. She'd spent days wrestling with the weight of Kalen and Lyric's betrayal, trying to figure out how to confront them. The truth was too big, too heavy to carry on her own any longer. And while her pain was undeniable, she refused to let it consume her. The opportunity for confrontation arrived sooner than she expected. That weekend, the Johnsons, her friendly neighbors, hosted their annual barbecue. Everyone was invited, including Lyric and Kalen. At first, Alara thought about skipping it entirely. The idea of standing in the same space as them, smiling politely while pretending nothing was wrong, seemed unbearable. But then she saw the invitation pinned to her fridge and froze. Maybe this was her chance, not to hide, but to take back control. She decided that the truth wouldn't stay buried, not behind closed doors, where deceit could twist the narrative, but in front of the very community that had celebrated her relationship with Kalen. The day of the barbecue was warm and sunny, with the scent of grilled burgers and laughter filling the Johnsons' backyard. Alara arrived alone, carrying a plate of cookies she'd barely managed to bake that morning. Her hands trembled as she stepped into the yard, but her head was held high. "Alara! So good to see you," Mrs. Harper greeted her warmly. "Where's Kalen?" Alara forced a smile. "He'll be here soon." Her voice wavered slightly, but she quickly steadied herself. Her heart thudded in her chest as she prepared for the inevitable. Kalen showed up not long after, his usual confident charm on full display. He moved through the crowd with ease, shaking hands and laughing as though nothing had changed. Not far behind him was Lyra, wearing a breezy sundress and carrying a bowl of potato salad. She waved at Alara, her smile bright and seemingly innocent, but it made Alara's stomach churn. The two of them eventually found each other near the drink table, chatting casually. Their body language, too familiar, too comfortable, hit Alara like a punch to the gut. The spark between them, the one she'd tried so hard to deny, was undeniable now. Alara's chest tightened, but she knew it was time. Each step toward them felt heavier than the last, but she refused to let fear hold her back. "Kalen," she said sharply, her voice cutting through their hushed conversation. Both of them turned, startled. Kalen's face registered confusion, and Lyric's showed something else. "Guilt." "Alara," Kalen began, his tone overly smooth. "I didn't know you were here already." Ignoring his casual attempt, Alara turned her glare toward Lyric before speaking. "I think it's time we all had a little talk, don't you?" Lyric's eyes widened, and Kalen glanced around nervously, noticing the curious stares of the neighbors nearby. "Alara," he said in a low voice, "maybe we should do this somewhere private?" "No," Alara said firmly, her voice rising. "We're doing this here. Everyone here has seen us as the perfect couple, but they deserve to know the truth. I deserve to say it." The yard grew silent, conversations fading as heads turned toward them. Alara's voice trembled but didn't falter. "I know about you too," she said, her gaze burning into Kalen. "I heard you. I saw the messages. I've pieced it all together." Kalen's face paled, and Lyric looked like she wanted to sink into the ground. "How long has this been going on?" Alara demanded. "How long have you been sneaking around behind my back while pretending to love me?" Kalen opened his mouth to protest. "Alara, it's not what you think." "Don't lie to me," she snapped. "Not here, Not anymore. Lyri finally spoke, her voice shaking. Alara, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. Alara's piercing glare turned to her. You didn't just hurt me, Lyric. You betrayed me. You acted like my friend while stealing the life I thought I was building. Lyric tried to speak again, but no words came out. Tears welled in Alara's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She turned back to Kaelin, her voice breaking but resolute. You made me believe in us, she said. You made me think we were building a future together, but it was all a lie. The silence that followed was deafening. Alara felt the weight of everyone's stares, but didn't shrink beneath it. Instead, she stood taller. I won't let you or this betrayal define me, she continued, her voice steady now. The wedding is off. You can have each other if that's what you want. But I'm done. With that, she turned and walked away, her head high and shoulders square. She didn't glance back, didn't wait to see their reactions. This moment wasn't for them. It was for her. Back home, Alara let the emotions of the day finally wash over her. The pain was still sharp and raw, but beneath it, a quiet strength was taking root. In the weeks that followed, she focused on herself. She painted, journaled, reconnected with old friends and redecorated her home, removing every trace of Kaelin and filling the space with things that brought her joy. Slowly the sadness began to lift, replaced by a sense of clarity and peace. For the first time in what felt like forever, Alara smiled, a real, genuine smile. She didn't need Kaelin, she didn't need anyone to complete her. She was enough. And for the first time in weeks, she felt truly free.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more